Great. Well, then we are actually to that part of our meeting. So Bryce, if you wouldn't mind, I'll put myself on mute and you can introduce our program today.
Wonderful. Well, like I said, today we have Brian Schimmel and Shawn Cardwell joining us to give us an update on the emergency shelter and talk to us a little bit about the Coalition on Rural Housing Insecurity. So, welcome.
Thank you, Bryce, and good afternoon, Rotarians. Appreciate the invitation to come speak to you. I'm going to give you just a kind of a synopsis of why it is that we do this work, and then get into some of the particular interests. But if you'll indulge me, I want to, I guess, hit on a couple other brags. Since COVID, or over the last 5 or 6 months, there have been members from both this noon Rotary group as well as the Daybreak Rotary that have contributed to bolstering our food access capacity at our food banks. And it ranges from the high school, Neil Armstrong, Centro, Virginia Garcia, and others where Rotarians have contributed their time, their mileage to getting produce or baked goods to the food banks. So it's been very appreciative, and it's definitely contributed to ensuring that our local residents have access to good, wholesome food. The other brag is for Van Dyke Appliance. Over the last several years, they've offered discounted appliances for nonprofit programs, and this year, I've been able to purchase discounted, refrigerator, freezer that have benefited both the day center and the high school pantry. So they've been exceptional partners and helping us to, make affordable purchases that free up money for other necessary resources. So I greatly appreciate their contribution. So this presentation is on behalf of the Forest Grove Foundation, and I know that there are several members here who have served on the foundation board in the past or stewarded the foundation for the first 25 years. So I appreciate their service. The foundation's proven to be a valuable asset to the community. If you haven't seen my introduction of the foundation, I'll be sending a link through Bryce for the introduction, but they're effectively a fiscal sponsor for charitable and community building efforts. And I'm going to be speaking to primarily about one of those efforts. Community Connection is leading a community response to poverty, or specifically an anti-poverty work group. The vision around this work group is that no person would go hungry, unhoused, or experience social isolation. And our key aim is to buoy social and economic mobility. So before we get into some of the actual work, I'm going to explain why it is we do this work. And some of this demographic data you may already be familiar with, but it just explains why this is so important, especially in light of COVID. On the left, you see, if you're familiar with folks who are on fixed incomes, whether it's Social Security, veterans pensions, or retirement, their income is well below what it costs to pay for a single bedroom. And then when you consider a household, there are many jobs in our cities alone, in Cornelius or Forest Grove, that fall under the threshold for a 2-bedroom apartment. And this can include medical assistants, janitors, laborers, food prep and fast food workers. So a good number of jobs in our own area, fall under the threshold for, affording a place to live. And in some of the studies that I've read nationally, oftentimes folks making less than $35,000 tend to access services such as food banks, clothing closets, or rent utility assistance, among other services. So it's a good number of jobs, not just the homeless community, that are accessing many of the services that are available locally. And just to carry the point further, even our youth, are exposed. 1 in 30 students tend to be classified as homeless, and these are actually young kids in grade school that are either doubled up with their family in another household. They may be living in a motel or any other circumstances that aren't a typical home. And in the Forest Grove School District, there's now 70 that are classified as homeless that receive extra assistance, including food. And then if you look at just at a macro level, in terms of how the percentage of income going toward housing, 1 in 4 overall, 50% is going into to rent. But if you look at just those extreme low incomes, the below 30,000, you're talking about 5 out of 6 of them are just, basically on the brink of losing their home if they're not able to supplement that income. And then, in other words, a person has to make over $22 an hour or work 89 hours at minimum wage to pay for a 2-bedroom apartment. So the basic story is that for a lot of these folks, they're staying in their homes because they're finding ways to supplement their income through food banks, clothing closets, rent assistance, or other services to help them stay in their home. And then with regard to the social service system, and oftentimes Forest Grove and Cornelius can delegate social services to the county. What I discovered is that the funding and capacity of those services meet a fraction of the need. And when I say a fraction, sometimes in the single digits, whether it's rent, utility assistance, basic, early childhood development, it's really just a fraction of the need. And many of the local service programs in our area, help to fill a gap, but a lot of them are what I would loosely refer to as mom and pop shops who have very limited resources and really depend on a community-wide cooperation or the cooperation between those agencies, as well as fundraising and advocacy to help shore up the gap. So with this anti-poverty work group I mentioned, there are 3 strategies we set out to do at the start of the year. Those include youth and family support. So we know that poverty for youth is really intergenerational. Their parents are probably experiencing poverty, and the kids are just following in that intergenerational situation. So we want to impede that and try to shore up our young people so that they have the same opportunities as their peers. With food security, we've come alongside now 10 programs to help bolster their capacity so that they can keep up with the growing demand. And since COVID, the demand on food is about 5 times what it was pre-COVID. So this is the volume of food boxes or households that are accessing food boxes, or the volume of food that now goes through each of those programs. And if for those who like real numbers, there's over 1,200 households that I know of that are accessing those food boxes, or that amounts to about 5,500 individuals when you include each person in the household. And then with housing security, this isn't just a homeless shelter, but providing some stability for people to stay in their home, or providing transitional housing so that beyond shelter, we're able to help, people get into some permanent housing situation. And with that, we're going to kind of double click into the housing and security. And this is where I want to invite my colleague, Shawn Cardwell, to speak to.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me at your noon Rotary. It's a pleasure to see you all and meet you all. I recognize only a few names, so lots of new faces, and I appreciate that. I'll take a moment maybe just to introduce myself in general. I grew up here. I'm from here. I grew up in Cornelius, and then although I lived on the Hillsborough School District side of things and went to Hill High, I came back to Pacific for college, and my mom graduated from Forest Grove High School. My grandma, my great-grandfather, all the way back to pioneers. I've had family here all the way back to the mid-1800s. So this is home for me. And I say that because not only did I grow up here, but I spent 10 years in the Midwest in Kansas City. Sorry to reset Kansas City for the Bronco fan, but I lived in Kansas City for 10 years while my wife got her PhD, but we're just back in the last year and a half. It's a homecoming for us. My family's still here. My wife's family is in Scappoose, but it's a pleasure to be back and to be welcomed into these kind of conversations. And Brian Schimmel has been gracious. I know you've known Brian for a while. Has been gracious to invite me in to help and serve in the housing side of this. It's a passion of mine to serve those that are in poverty and to do it in essentially my hometown where my family owned businesses and has devoted so much time. Is just a pleasure. So I appreciate your graciousness to receive us and me back into the community. We live out on the side of the hill out on Gales Creek Road and are just loving being back in Forest Grove this last year and a half. So maybe that's just as a quick introduction. On the programmatic side here, a few months ago, Brian had asked me to step in to help direct what is called the Coalition on Rural Housing Insecurity. And that is maybe, and again, my understanding is that you had an understanding of what winter shelter was here in Forest Grove and Cornelius over these last years. And really it's a program that is working underneath the Forest Grove Foundation as a fiscal sponsored by the Forest Grove Foundation. And the shelter was providing emergency and winter sheltering essentially from November through March ongoingly to be as frank about it, saving lives from people that are in the cold, sheltering overnight and giving those that don't have a shelter or a home that place to be while it's cold during the winter. And it's good work and it's needed work, and the faith-based organizations, as well as I'm sure the Rotary here and other nonprofits, served those people well over the years. And so we thank you for that. With COVID, it changes the game fundamentally in the sheltering situation. And just due to congregating people together, overnight stays, the amount of volunteer support needed, we had to change the idea of what it meant to shelter people. And the previous director of this organization had the vision and foresight to switch from a sheltering model, a seasonal sheltering model, to a year-round housing model, to create a coalition of individuals and organizations that were thinking about and trying to advocate and implement not just sheltering, but housing for individuals. So that's my job now. And we have a coalition of organizations that are thinking about this, a growing coalition of organizations. And we're really focused on not just providing, although we care about sheltering, providing longer term, more sustainable housing solutions for people. And what that looks like is what you see on the slide there. Specifically because of COVID and other challenges, we've had to pivot over this last year to specifically engage in street outreach. And simply what that means is trying to reach individuals where they're at, whether that's it's encampments or individuals that are living on porches in the downtown area. We've undoubtedly seen a number of these friends that are out there, these community members, these neighbors that don't have a home. We are and will continue to be a service to reach out to them and serve them. And what serve means is to bring clothes, blankets, food, supplies, tents, whatever they need to them. And so that's one thing we've pivoted to and are focusing on in the season. Sheltering is still a priority, but is had to change. Like I mentioned, the language you'll hear, and I even heard it on the news recently, there's congregate models of shelter and there's non-congregate models of shelter. The congregating models of shelter aren't the best practice. They're not safe. They're not as safe as a non-congregate model. Maybe I'll say it that way. And so we've pushed here out in Forest Grove and Cornelius to say we want to support sheltering in the best practice, and that's a non-congregate model. And so the county, this is pretty fresh news, but the county has come up with a budget unique to Forest Grove and Cornelius to create a motel stay system for up to 30 individuals this winter. So my outreach team will go out and we'll find these people, and then essentially we'll be able to put 30 of them into a hotel from mid-November through March. That's a long hotel stay, and it's very expensive. We'll be providing food, but it's going to keep people not only alive and warm and fed, but distance from one another with their own space, and be able to prevent, obviously, pandemic spread in any way, not just within the homeless population, but those that serve, predominantly those that serve the homeless in the sheltering model through faith-based organizations, are also at-risk individuals simply because of the age category. And I think we all know some of these issues. And so we're able to keep people separated in this important time to do that. But we're very encouraged that the county was able to come up with the money to be able to do this. We're partnering with an organization from Hillsborough that is have been doing this for over a decade, and they're going to help provide the programming around that sheltering model. We're still identifying the hotels. I mean, we don't have many hotels to choose from, but we're identifying the hotels to rent rooms and put these people in, and our friends in Hillsborough will be helping with the services there. But even more exciting from my perspective is not just the sheltering, but the housing. And so we're working on transitional housing models. We're doing a lot of research. Pacific University in partnership has given us graduate students and undergrad students to help this research. And we are looking into models that are both in our region and beyond for what it means to create transitional housing. The issue here is that there's a lot of people without a house, experiencing homelessness. And there's a model that says if we can get them into housing, they'll be able to stabilize, and we call it permanent supportive housing. They'll be able to stabilize in a supportive environment and get their needs met, which might involve, it can involve a number of things: work, job placements. It could involve drug interventions, mental health interventions, just healthcare interventions. A lot of services that can be put around someone if they're in a stable environment. The issue is the capacity and the inventory of supportive housing in our county, and specifically on the western end of the county, it doesn't exist. So there's a gap there between people that are homeless and then an inventory of housing. And there's even a lack of case management in between. Our friends in Cornelius at Open Door are a great ally in this. They're doing good work out there. If you don't know about Open Door, I would recommend hearing from them at some time. But there's a gap there, and we want to help fill that gap in Forest Grove and Cornelius with transitional housing. So we're looking at some models, and that doesn't mean apartments. That means some other aspects of housing. You've heard of tiny homes, or you've heard of different types of shelters that maybe could go into that imagination space. I apologize, I forgot to put an image of what these could look like, but they're essentially small villages of tiny abodes, homes, pods, sometimes we call them, that allow people to come in and stabilize for 2 to 12 months, get services wrapped around them as they wait for the inventory to grow. And that inventory takes a long time, because we're talking about literally apartment buildings being built, which is beyond the scope of my organization, but there are others in our community that are doing that good work as well. But that takes a lot of money and a lot of time that we wait for. So in that middle ground, we're talking about transitional housing, and that's the work that I'm doing, is to find funding, find partners, and just communicate that there's a potential amazing model that can be coming into Forest Grove that support some of our community members that just are without a home right now. And in that process, again, coalition building's on there. The coalition is an encompassing, we're not we're not trying to cut people out of a coalition. We're actually trying to find as many partners and friends that we can to join us in this. And if you are part of an organization, or the Rotary wants to continue the conversation on any of these fronts, then that's the work I'm doing, is connecting and communicating about how we're doing this. And we're doing this with churches and businesses and nonprofits. Well, I think I'll leave it there. I've taken plenty of time to explain some of that. It might live a bit abstractly, but again, we're getting on the ground with outreach, and then we're doing the research and putting proposals and pitches together with the cities on how to potentially bring some transitional housing villages, for lack of a better term or a better image of that right now, to come to bear within the next year or so. And I'll kick it back to Brian, or however the rest of the program goes. And if Brian, you have any questions for me that I've missed or you think are pertinent, feel free to kick it back.
Yeah, well, while we're on that, in this depth, I want to welcome any questions that folks have at the moment.
Can you talk a little bit about what your outreach team looks like?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're very much in that work right now. I have a team assembled. I should say, over the summer, we did some outreach, and that was specifically emergency COVID response outreach. And that looked like a few individuals going out to encampments and taking supplies, finding people, building relationship, and bringing supplies. So we had to end that just because the grant funding for that specific moment in time ended. We paused it, and we've just got a contract to continue that. So I'm putting a team together. I have a team which includes people experiencing homelessness. Because we're building relationships and the people that want to help their friends, I'll be hiring literally homeless people to actually give them work, but also serve me. They know better the population than anyone. So that's part of my outreach team are some of those people. And again, we are just on the front edge of this, and we will be in the next couple of weeks getting people, as it gets cold, on the ground. And we go out and bring supplies. My desire was to get I'll give a little bit of pitch and vision here, is to create a dedicated mobile outreach unit. We have I don't want to say obligation, but maybe a responsibility of our heart to really cover the western side of Washington County, which isn't just Cornelius and Forest Grove. It's Gaston, it's Banks, it's North Plains, it's Gales Creek, and the county extends even further than that. But there's not any service. We're the only ones out here doing this, essentially. There's no services out here. So mobility and a van fully stocked with anything we need when we go out to Gales Creek, for example, is needed. I haven't been able to secure funding yet, but some of you might know, have a connection at Doherty Ford that's just waiting to give away that van to me. But I say that tongue in cheek, but it's a real need that we have. But that's what it looks like. Essentially acquiring supplies. That's another potential pitch. We're going to need supplies, and we're accumulating those supplies and meals and socks and blankets and tents and all this. And then we take them out to people that are out there, because even though we got 30 people for a shelter in a hotel, that's still not enough capacity. We will still have people that are cold this winter, unfortunately. But we want to still meet them and keep them warm and fed if we can. Does that answer your question there?
It does. It looks like Michael has a question as well.
Yeah, I was curious about the idea of a local land bank or land trust model, and maybe a partnership with Habitat for Humanity to build homes on that land that people could actually end up owning. Maybe it's tiny homes that they would be building and then giving to people, or providing them through a rent structure. But the land bank model is one that's being used in other places, and I was wondering if you'd done research on that.
I'm not familiar with how it's being used out here. When I was in, my wife's an economist, PhD economist as well. So she's just a major ally to my work. But in Kansas City, we saw some of this. They had a massive land bank in the urban core that we were aware of how they were doing that. So I have some experience. I have some awareness of that in a different context, but I would be more than open to that conversation and what that looks like. If Michael, you want to follow up, or if I do have some connection with Habitat for Humanity, but would love to talk more about what that could look like or how to engage that.
Good. I'd be very interested in having that conversation.
Thanks, Michael.
All right. Any other immediate questions?
I'm just curious to know, is there any way to tell the difference between the people that are there because of income and versus the ones that are addicted to drugs?
I don't think you would be able to tell with a visual inspection, but you would be able to tell in relationships. So the benefit of having an outreach team on the ground that's consistent and well-funded and well-stocked is it builds relationship. And we're interested in building relationships with these individuals because they're part of our community. A lot of them are from here, or it's a decision, it's a lost loved one, it's a lost job. There's a lot of reasons why people end up in these situations, which sometimes are bad choices, but a lot of times are unfortunate circumstance, especially in a pandemic, very difficult. So it's hard. It would be hard to tell without engaging in a conversation. But because we do that with outreach, we can learn about them. We can, there's some social work processes that help identify the needs of people. And there's lots of services. Unfortunately, there's not lots of services in Forest Grove yet, but there's lots of services in our county that we could help wrap around those individuals. We hope over time to rebuild the accessibility to those services, whether that's drug intervention, mental health intervention, job training, all those kinds of things. We hope to rebuild some of those services in Forest Grove, but that's again, a long journey and takes time. And I'm not going to do all that. We're going to find allies and rebuild what that looks like here with the city, as well as nonprofits and churches and businesses. So it's, yeah, James, I appreciate that question. Don't shy away from that conversation with anyone you might meet. I think they'd be happy to tell you their story.
The reason I'm asking, they're talking in the newspapers about Oregon, that people that have a place to live have a better chance of getting off drugs than the ones that are still homeless.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. There's a model in the county called Housing First, that if you can get someone into housing without making that barrier very low for housing, if you can get them into housing and then wrap services that they need, because everyone needs something different or a different assortment of services, that housing stabilizes them in such a way that allows them to grow and live a fuller life, to flourish, essentially. And sometimes people don't understand that they're either opposed to that idea about housing first, but I'll just say it's a county model, and it's believed to be successful. I mean, it's proven to be successful. I should say it that way. It's not a belief. It's been seen over and over. The problem is there's no inventory right now for that, so we can't just find our homeless friends and say, here's a home. Those don't exist. So we've got to create some transition for that. Thank you for that question, though.
There was somebody else who raised their hand.
Hi, Shawn. This is Araceli. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. It's so critical, and this issue just is very complex with many layers. So I'm very happy to see that there's efforts around this, especially in Washington County. My question is more around terminology, and I just want to get a sense of your thoughts on this. So I know Multnomah County is switching or is replacing the word homelessness with houselessness. And I know that language is very important right now as we're trying to move from deficit to asset models. And so I'm just wondering what your framework on that is, or if there's what the difference really is between those two terms.
It's a great question. It may be a longer conversation, so I'm happy to engage, give you an answer, and then if you want to talk more, I'd be happy to do that too. I think the idea of home is a beautiful idea. And home can mean a lot of things for a lot of people. And some people, and I'm not challenging these definitions, some people say, I'm home when I'm with my loved ones. Wherever we are, we're home. Or some people have a faith experience of home, to apply that to their faith expression. That's a home place for me. Or they might have any level of experience of home. So I think taking the word homeless off of the table is probably good and wise, because you don't want to, you can't take home. I don't know that you can take home from people that have different definitions of what that might mean to themselves. So I think that's one aspect of it. So a replacement is to say they're houseless, because a houseless is an object. Home is potentially a good way to say an abstract concept, and a house is not. It's a place that looks like wood or brick or something. And you can say someone does or doesn't have a house. And so it's a little more, it's easier definition and an easier way not to create barriers or boundaries, but I think a more dignified way to say it. So when I say homeless, I don't mean it in an undignified way. I'm aware of the language, but I'm also aware that people's processes and understanding that if I say houseless, they might think I'm talking about a different group of people. And I'm not really talking about a different group of people. So I think we're caught in time of a transition in language. So I use them synonymously right now in terms of education, in terms of talking to people about what this is about. So I'm not saying how Multnomah County is thinking about that or how Washington County might think about it. Sometimes I'll use the term for individuals experiencing homelessness or houselessness to not make it an identity for people. We don't want to make this a part of their identity. This is a circumstance that they're living in. So maybe that helps a little bit on some of the, I hope I'm getting to your question, but that's how I see it in a certain way.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and proceed so we can get everyone out of here on time. So I did want to, I guess, offer for those interested in understanding ways to serve, to give you some idea. And this reflects not just Shawn's interests, but regarding youth and food. So I want to just give you some ideas for how you can volunteer, donate, or give financially. So one example is, I mentioned we have upwards of 10 different programs that are distributing food in some way. And I've just listed 2 of them here. The Elks facilitates foods for families in connection with the school district. And on Thursday mornings, they pack food, and on Friday mornings, they load those into buses. And then Friday afternoons, Neil Armstrong has a program that packs and distributes food. And like I mentioned earlier, a link for this presentation will go out to you. So don't worry about, writing stuff down or getting additional detail here. You'll be able to get this later. But that gives you just one idea for volunteering time. In terms of donating or giving, the holidays are coming up. So there's at least, 2 or more organizations that are putting together Thanksgiving baskets followed by Christmas baskets. So these will include food, clothes, gifts, whether it's toys for kids. But you also have the option of, many of these programs are very specific about, since they have relationships with the families, they know what the kids want or what the families need. And so if you want to donate cash through the foundation, that money could go to a program that would pay for, items that a family requested. So you have, either the option to donate or to give. And then what I wanted to finish up on was another brag. I know this group donated money to the shower trailer that was constructed last fall. And just to give you an update, we spent about $22,000 on a custom design model that you see pictured here. In just 1 year of operation, we've had over 4,000 showers, and it's being used by a day center, open door day center. It's been used by, I think, upwards of 4 different shelters, not just in Forest Grove and Cornelius, but also in Beaverton. And then most recently, during the wildfires, we were able to mobilize it out to Hag Lake, where firefighters were able to take showers. So this has proven to be an asset, not just for our houseless, homeless community, but also for those that are fighting fires. So with that, again, thank you for the time. Thank you for your generosity in the past and your willingness to contribute going forward.
Thank you so much, Brian. Does anyone have a question for Brian? I know we're going to get that information that he's going to provide in our next Rotateller. There'll be links so that we can connect with all of these organizations if we can donate items, money, time. But okay, well, thank you both, Brian and Shawn, for joining us today.